The old city apartment hummed with a rhythm all its own, a symphony of distant traffic, the murmur of countless lives behind thin walls, and the persistent, almost imperceptible tick of Mrs. Gable's antique grandfather clock. In the heart of this quiet domesticity was Leo, a German shepherd of imposing size and surprising stillness. He was not a dog given to boisterous play or incessant barking. His world seemed to revolve around a single, large bay window overlooking the street, a window that served as his personal, ever-changing canvas, from dawn until dusk. Leo occupied his self-appointed post, his large head, framed by ears perpetually pricked, rested on the cool windowsill. His eyes, a deep, intelligent amber, fixed on something unseen to Mrs. Gable. She often found him there, a majestic, unmoving statue of canine contemplation. Still at it. Are we? Leo, she'd chuckle, patting his broad back as she shuffled past with her knitting. She saw it as a quaint habit, a dog's peculiar pastime, a testament to his calm disposition. She believed he was simply observing the mundane ballet of urban life, the hurried pedestrians, the rumbling buses, the occasional flash of a taxi's yellow paint. She had no inkling of the profound depth of his vigil, the unseen currents that drew his gaze, or the silent, aching purpose that resided within his loyal heart. Leo, however, was no ordinary dog. His intelligence stretched beyond simple commands and tricks. He possessed an innate empathy, a keen sensitivity to the undercurrents of emotion that flowed through the concrete jungle outside. He could sense distress, even from a distance. Pick up on the subtle shifts in human behavior that most overlooked. His ancestors, bred for protection and loyalty, had passed down an instinct for guardianship, a silent alarm system tuned to the frequencies of vulnerability. This instinct, dormant for years in the peaceful confines of Mrs. Gable's apartment, was slowly, steadily being awakened, a subtle shift in the city's rhythm, almost imperceptible to Mrs. Gable, had been the catalyst. A moving truck, large and cumbersome, had pulled up across the street several weeks prior, disgorging boxes and furniture into the apartment directly opposite theirs. New neighbors. Young neighbors. By the looks of the youthful faces bustling in and out, Leo had observed the entire process with an intensity that surpassed his usual window gazing. He watched as lights flickered on in the evenings, as new curtains were hung, as a tiny, pink-wrapped bundle was carried carefully through the doorway. It was the bundle that truly captivated him. He couldn't explain why, not in human terms, but something about its fragile presence had resonated with a primal chord deep within him. He began to feel a subtle tug, a sense of something important unfolding across the divide. The apartment, once just another brick facade, had become a focal point, a mysterious realm where a new, delicate life now resided. His silent vigil intensified, transforming from a mere habit into a quiet, unwavering obsession, a profound purpose, yet to be fully revealed, was slowly taking root in the heart of this silent guardian. Leo's routine, once a placid observance of the outside world, began to evolve. The subtle shift had started with the arrival of the new neighbors, but it truly crystallized on a particularly mundane Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Gable was in the kitchen, humming a forgotten tune as she prepared a light lunch. The gentle clinking of cutlery the only disruption to the apartment's usual quiet. Leo, as always, was at his window, a silent sentinel. His gaze, however, was no longer merely drifting across the street. It was pinpointed, focused with an almost laser-like intensity on a specific point in the apartment across the way. Mrs. Gable, retrieving a tea towel, paused, noticing the peculiar rigidity in his posture. He wasn't just watching, he was absorbing. Curiosity piqued. She ambled over, peering out. but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just the muted interior of the neighboring apartment. A glimpse of a wall, a corner of a sofa. Then, it happened. A flash of vibrant color erupted on what Mrs. Gable realized was a television screen, just visible through a gap in the new apartment's curtains. Bright, cartoonish figures danced across the glass, accompanied by a cascade of cheerful, lilting music. It was a children's cartoon, unmistakable in its playful simplicity. Leo's ears, usually pricked in alertness, twitched, then flattened slightly in an almost contemplative manner, and then a tiny, almost imperceptible wag started at the tip of his tail. A small, rhythmic thumping against the windowsill that was barely audible even to Mrs. Gable. "Well, look at that. Old boy." Mrs. Gable chuckled, a soft, amused sound. "Taken to watching television, have we?" "You're a peculiar one. Leo?" She imagined him simply enjoying the novelty. Perhaps the flickering lights and the cheerful sounds held some simple canine appeal. She attributed it to another one of his endearing eccentricities, a charming quirk that made him unique. She often mused that Leo was an old soul in a dog's body, and this just cemented her belief. The idea that there was any deeper significance, any profound connection being forged in that silent, window-framed moment, was utterly lost on her. How could a dog, even one as intelligent as Leo, truly understand the complexities of the human world, let alone feel an emotional resonance with a children's program? Yet, for Leo, it wasn't just about the flashing colors or the upbeat tunes. There was something else, something subtle that human ears, dulled by the cacophony of daily life, might miss, interspersed with the playful sounds of the cartoon. Leo detected faint, almost imperceptible cries, not continuous wails, but short, sharp bursts of distress, quickly muffled, the kind of cries that bespoke a tiny, vulnerable life. He had heard them before, fleeting and indistinct. But now, with the accompanying cheerfulness of the cartoon, a pattern began to emerge. The cartoon seemed to follow the cries in a curious juxtaposition. He didn't know what it meant, not consciously, but his instincts, honed over generations, registered vulnerability and a nascent need for comfort. The cartoon, therefore, became a beacon, a signal of activity, and more importantly, a potential source of relief for the tiny, unseen being across the street. Leo's tail continued its soft, almost subconscious wag, a quiet testament to a connection forming, a silent promise being whispered across the urban divide, a promise that only he, the quiet watcher, seemed to understand. He was no longer just observing, he was learning, interpreting, and in his own canine way, beginning to care. The seed of a profound guardianship had been planted, nurtured by the innocent sounds of a children's cartoon. Across the street, in the apartment that had so captivated Leo's quiet attention, life was anything but harmonious. Sarah and Mark, the young couple who had recently moved in, were navigating the turbulent waters of new parenthood, a journey that proved to be far more arduous than any glossy parenting magazine had ever depicted. Their tiny bundle of joy, Lily, was less a bundle of joy and more a relentless, colicky wail from the moment she arrived. Lily had introduced an almost constant state of exhaustion and despair into their once peaceful home. Her cries weren't just the typical demands of an infant, they were piercing, inconsolable screams that seemed to echo off the walls, tearing at the frayed edges of Sarah's sanity. Days blurred into nights, marked only by feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the ceaseless, heart-wrenching sound of their baby's distress. Sarah, a vibrant woman who once thrived on spontaneity and creative projects, had become a shadow of her former self. Her once bright eyes were now perpetually shadowed with dark circles. Her shoulders slumped, with a weariness that seeped into her very bones. She felt a profound and terrifying sense of failure. Every attempt to soothe Lily felt futile. Rocking, singing, swaddling, walking. Car rides, nothing seemed to work. She'd tried every trick, every piece of advice from well-meaning friends and Google searches, only to be met with another fresh wave of Lily's anguished cries. "I just don't know what to do anymore." "Mark," she'd whisper, her voice raw with unshed tears, as Mark tried valiantly to comfort their screaming daughter in the dead of night. Mark, for his part, was equally exhausted. He worked long hours, trying to keep their finances afloat, only to return home to a battlefield of infant distress. He loved Sarah fiercely, and Lily even more so, but the constant pressure was taking its toll on them both. Their apartment, which they had lovingly decorated, now felt like a gilded cage, filled with the pervasive sound of their baby's sorrow. Sarah often found herself drifting to the large window in their living room. Lily clutched to her chest, the baby's tiny face screwed up in another fit of crying. She'd stare out at the bustling street below, a world moving on, oblivious to her quiet torment. Sometimes, she'd glance across at the building opposite, catching glimpses of an elderly woman, sometimes a large, dark dog. They seemed so peaceful, so calm. A pang of envy, sharp and unexpected, would twist in her gut. She'd dismiss it quickly, feeling guilty for such a thought. But the feeling lingered, a longing for just a moment of that tranquility. The idea that the dog across the street, the one with the intelligent eyes, was observing her plight, was utterly unthinkable. She was too consumed by her own pain, too lost in the fog of sleep deprivation and maternal guilt. Her world had shrunk to the four walls of their apartment, the endless cycle of feeding and crying, and the overwhelming feeling of inadequacy. She yearned for a solution, a miracle, anything to bring relief to her precious Lily, and in turn, to herself and Mark. Little did she know, that miracle, or at least a powerful catalyst for change, was quietly watching, learning, and caring from a window just across the way, observing their struggles with an empathy that transcended species, preparing for an intervention that would profoundly alter their lives. The subtle, nascent connection Leo had formed with the unseen baby across the street began to solidify into an unshakable daily ritual. The flicker of the television screen, the cheerful cacophony of the cartoons, became his anchor, his predictable point of focus in a world of otherwise random human activity. Every morning, after Mrs. Gable had her customary cup of Earl Grey and the faint scent of toast lingered in the air, Leo would pad silently to the bay window. He wouldn't jump up or paw at the glass, instead. He'd settle into his usual spot, his large, muscular body a comforting weight on the rug, his chin resting patiently on the cool windowsill. He waited, not with the frantic energy of a dog anticipating a walk, but with a quiet, almost spiritual patience. His eyes, the color of rich honey, would be fixed on the window opposite. An unwavering gaze? He seemed to know, instinctively, that at a certain time, the vibrant colors would explode into life, and with them, the faint yet distinct sounds of a baby's cries would inevitably follow. Mrs. Gable, initially only mildly amused by Leo's TV habit, now found herself unconsciously participating in it. She noticed his quiet anticipation, the way his ears would subtly prick up around the same time each day. One sunny afternoon, forgetting to open the blinds as she usually did, she saw Leo nudge the closed fabric with his nose, then let out a soft, questioning whine, turning his head to look at her with an expression that bordered on plaintive. A realization, small but significant, dawned on her. This wasn't just a fleeting interest for him, it was important. Oh, you want your cartoons? Do you? My dear, she murmured, a gentle smile creasing her lips. She walked over and, with a soft click, pulled the blinds all the way up, flooding the window with light. Leo let out a contented sigh, a soft exhalation that seemed to carry all the quiet relief in the world, and settled back into his vigil. From that day forward, the blinds were always left open, a silent acknowledgement from Mrs. Gable of Leo's peculiar, yet evidently vital, daily engagement. She began to wonder, a little more deeply now, about the new neighbors. She sometimes heard the distant, muffled wails of a baby, indistinct and quickly fading, as if absorbed by the thick city walls. She never connected those sounds to Leo's newfound fascination with the cartoons. To her, the cartoons were a source of amusement for him. Nothing more. The idea that her loyal companion, this magnificent creature of instinct and silent devotion, could be so profoundly attuned to the unspoken sorrow of a stranger's child was simply beyond her comprehension. It was a level of empathy she hadn't considered possible in an animal, let alone one as stoic and self-possessed as Leo. She would often find herself working in the living room, knitting or reading, her eyes occasionally drifting to Leo's still form at the window. He was a constant, comforting presence, a silent anchor in her solitary life. She imagined him simply enjoying the visual stimulation, perhaps even discerning the shapes and movements on the screen. He never barked, never reacted overtly, but his subtle tail wags, the occasional soft whine that vibrated through his chest, spoke volumes to her. They were small signs of quiet contentment, or so she believed. The world outside Leo's window continued its ceaseless hum. Cars passed, people walked. The seasons slowly shifted. But for Leo, the focal point remained the same, that particular window across the street. A window that held the secret of a tiny, struggling life. A secret he was slowly, meticulously piecing together. He was a guardian without a name, a protector without a direct charge. But his vigilance was no less profound. He was building his own silent connection, brick by emotional brick, preparing himself for a role he was instinctively drawn to fulfill. The routine wasn't just for him. It was for the unseen little neighbor, a silent promise whispered across the urban chasm. As weeks bled into a month, Leo's daily ritual at the window transcended mere observation. What began as a visual fascination with the flickering images on the television screen across the street evolved into something far more profound, a deep, almost uncanny act of listening. He wasn't just watching the cartoons, he was decoding them, using their cheerful sounds as a filter through which to perceive the subtle, often heartbreaking reality of the tiny life they accompanied. Mrs. Gable remained blissfully unaware of the true complexity of Leo's absorption. She continued to see his vigil as a charming eccentricity, a canine equivalent of human escapism. He's really quite taken with those animated characters. She'd often muse aloud, stroking his soft fur as he lay fixed at his post. She'd occasionally hear the faint, high-pitched cries that sometimes drifted across the quiet street, but dismiss them as the usual sounds of a baby. Quickly lost in the background hum of the city, her hearing dulled by age, couldn't discern the nuances, the precise timing, or the underlying distress that Leo's far more acute senses picked up. For Leo, however, every giggle, every triumphant musical flourish, every silly voice from the cartoon was punctuated by a deeper, more urgent narrative. He noticed that the cartoon's most buoyant moments often coincided with the sharpest, most desperate cries from the apartment opposite. It was a bizarre, almost cruel synchronicity. A character might be singing a joyful song, while simultaneously, a tiny, distressed whimper would cut through the air, quickly muffled but never entirely silenced. He began to associate the playful sounds and music with the faint, yet persistent, cries of the baby. He could differentiate between a hungry cry, a tired cry, and the truly agonizing wail of discomfort that seemed to tear at the fabric of the air. Even from a distance, his ears would swivel, imperceptibly to human eyes, tracking the source of the sound, triangulating its origin to the very heart of the apartment where the little bundle of pink resided. His protective instincts, deeply ingrained in his German Shepherd DNA, instincts honed over generations for guarding and nurturing, were now fully awake and stirring within him. He felt an unsettling knot of empathy tighten in his chest whenever those sharp, colicky screams pierced the otherwise cheerful atmosphere. He sensed distress, an unvoiced plea for help. Even through the thick walls and the pane of glass separating their worlds, it was an instinctual understanding, bypassing the need for words or direct interaction. He simply knew that a small, vulnerable creature was suffering, and something within him yearned to alleviate that pain. Sometimes, when the cries were particularly prolonged and agonizing, Leo would shift restlessly. A low, almost inaudible growl would vibrate deep in his chest. Quickly suppressed, a primal expression of frustration at his helplessness. He would cast a glance back at Mrs. Gable, his amber eyes filled with an unspoken urgency. A silent question. But Mrs. Gable, engrossed in her book or crossword puzzle, would simply offer a distracted pat. Misinterpreting his restlessness as a desire for a walk or perhaps a treat, this deepening connection was a heavy burden on Leo. He couldn't act directly. He couldn't cross the street, knock on the door, and offer comfort. He was confined to his silent vigil, a prisoner of circumstance. His powerful instincts for protection thwarted by the barriers of human convention. The mystery of the constant crying, the puzzling juxtaposition with the bright, happy cartoons, only intensified his focus. He found himself dissecting every sound, every visual cue, trying to piece together the full picture of the tiny life he was observing. The daily ritual was no longer a quirk. It was a mission. Leo was becoming an unseen listener, a silent guardian compiling an emotional dossier on the small, struggling neighbor. The gentle tilt of his head as he strained to hear, the subtle ripple of muscles under his sleek coat as he tensed with each cry, the almost mournful cast to his intelligent eyes, all spoke of a dog burdened by a secret empathy, a profound concern that transcended the boundaries of species. The stage was being set for an intervention, though no one, least of all Leo, knew how or when it would unfold. He simply continued his vigil, gathering every sound, every nuance, preparing for the moment his unique understanding might finally be called upon in the apartment across the street. While Leo diligently pieced together his silent narrative, Sarah was slowly but surely reaching her breaking point. The relentless, high-pitched wails of baby Lily had become the soundtrack to her existence. A constant, grating noise that eroded her patience, her confidence, and finally, her spirit. Each sunrise brought not the promise of a new day, but the dread of another 24 hours spent in a fog of sleep deprivation and profound helplessness. Lily's colic had worsened, transforming from sporadic fits of crying into an almost continuous torrent of distress. It wasn't just physical pain, it was a profound inability to be soothed, a challenge that felt deeply personal to Sarah. She would rock Lily for hours, walk endless circles around their living room, sing lullabies until her throat was hoarse, only for Lily's tiny face to remain contorted in anguish. The pediatrician had offered sympathetic platitudes and mild suggestions, but no magic cure. It's just colic. Sarah, she'll grow out of it, they'd said. Words that felt utterly meaningless in the face of her overwhelming reality. Sarah felt profoundly isolated. Mark, bless his heart, did what he could, taking turns with the night feedings and trying to offer words of comfort. But he had to go to work. He left each morning for a world that functioned normally, a world free of the constant, piercing cries that defined Sarah's every waking and non-waking moment. She tried to reach out to friends, but their well-meaning advice often felt dismissive, their cheerful stories of their own perfect babies only deepening her sense of inadequacy. She felt utterly alone in this torment, trapped within the walls of her own home and the confines of her own despair. Often, she would collapse onto the sofa, Lily still screaming in her arms, and simply gaze out the large window. The vibrant city life outside, once a source of comfort and connection, now seemed a cruel mockery. People laughed, cars honked with purpose, and life unfolded with a careless ease that was utterly alien to her current existence. She would watch them, tears silently streaming down her face. Blending with the occasional wetness on her cheeks from Lily's frantic movements, she felt like an invisible spectator, utterly detached from the world beyond her glass prison. Sometimes, her gaze would inadvertently drift to the building opposite. She'd vaguely register the elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, moving about, and sometimes, the large, dark silhouette of the German Shepherd, Leo, at his window. She barely noticed him, her mind too consumed by her own pain to truly register anything beyond the immediate agony of Lily's cries. The dog seemed calm, peaceful, an image of quiet serenity that only underscored the chaos within her own apartment. She would quickly look away, the fleeting image a reminder of a normalcy she desperately yearned for, but felt was slipping further and further out of her grasp. The sense of failure gnawed at her. She was a mother, and her most basic function, to soothe and comfort her child, felt utterly beyond her. Guilt was a constant companion, whispering insidious thoughts. Am I doing something wrong? Am I a bad mother? Why can't I make my baby happy? Each cry was a fresh accusation. Each sleepless night a further descent into a profound, suffocating darkness. She felt trapped in a nightmare, and there seemed to be no awakening, no relief in sight. This profound vulnerability, this raw desperation, created an emotional void, a silent cry of her own, one that was being registered, understood, and profoundly felt by the silent guardian, watching across the street, preparing for a subtle yet life-altering intervention. The evening air hung heavy with the oppressive silence that often precedes a storm. Inside Mrs. Gable's apartment, the usual domestic peace felt brittle, stretched thin by an unseen tension. Leo, at his customary post by the window, was no longer merely watching. His body was taut, every muscle coiled, his senses hyper-alert. The faint muffled cries from across the street had escalated, transforming from intermittent whimpers into a continuous, heart-rending shriek. Lily's colic had reached a new, terrifying crescendo. Leo's normally calm demeanor had shattered. He began to whine, a low, guttural sound that vibrated deep in his chest. Unlike any noise Mrs. Gable had ever heard him make, it wasn't a demanding whine for food or attention. It was a sound laced with an urgency bordering on distress. His eyes, usually serene, were now wide, filled with a frantic light as he stared, unblinking, at the distant window. He paced restlessly, a heavy, rhythmic thud of paws on the polished hardwood floor. One moment he was at the window, the next he was nudging Mrs. Gable's hand with his wet nose, then retreating to the window again, his head swiveling back and forth as if trying to urge her to see what he saw, to hear what he heard. Mrs. Gable, engrossed in a particularly challenging crossword puzzle, initially dismissed his agitation. "What is it, old boy?" "Is it time for your dinner?" she murmured, her voice soft and preoccupied. She reached out to pat his head, but Leo recoiled, his focus unwavering from the apartment across the street. He let out another, more insistent whine, then tried to gently push her towards the window with his broad head. His tail, usually a reliable barometer of his mood, was tucked low, a sign of deep disquiet. Never in all their years together had Mrs. Gable seen Leo so distressed, so relentlessly persistent. He wasn't just restless, he was agitated, almost frantic. His usual stoicism had evaporated, replaced by an overt display of profound concern. The sound of Lily's cries, barely audible to Mrs. Gable, was a roaring tempest in Leo's ears, a symphony of infant anguish that clawed at his protective instincts. He could feel the baby's desperation, hear the mother's unspoken plea for relief. Even if she herself was too consumed by despair to voice it, he pushed his nose into Mrs. Gable's hand again, harder this time, then pawed gently at her arm. When she still didn't move towards the window, he let out a sharp, almost bark-like whine, a sound of pure exasperation. This finally caught Mrs. Gable's full attention. She lowered her crossword, her brow furrowed with concern. "Leo, what on earth is wrong with you?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. She followed his gaze, but still saw nothing remarkable. The lights were on in the apartment, just as they usually were at this hour, yet Leo's insistence was undeniable. He was trembling faintly, his powerful frame vibrating with an intensity that surprised her. He kept darting his gaze between her and the window, his message clear, if unspoken. Look, listen. Something is wrong. He nudged her towards the window again, then stood there, panting softly, his eyes fixed on the distant apartment. A profound sorrow etched into his noble features. Mrs. Gable's mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation for his behavior. Had he seen a stray cat? A squirrel on the fire escape? No, his attention was too singularly focused on that window, on the apartment of the young couple with the new baby. A faint, almost imperceptible sound reached her ears then. A tiny, almost swallowed whimper. Could it be the baby, she thought? A flicker of understanding beginning to ignite? Leo's sensitivity had always been remarkable, but this was something else entirely. It was a profound, empathic connection that transcended anything she had ever witnessed. A cold dread began to trickle down her spine. If Leo, her usually calm and collected companion, was this agitated, something truly significant must be happening. His insistent pleas, his unusual distress, weren't random. They were a powerful, silent communication, an urgent plea for her to intervene. He was asking her, in the only way he knew how, to acknowledge the distress he was so clearly sensing, to act on the unseen suffering that was tearing at his protective heart. The moment was ripe for action. Prompted by the unwavering intuition of a loyal German shepherd, the insistent urgency in Leo's eyes was undeniable. His silent pleas had finally pierced through Mrs. Gable's quiet complacency, replacing her mild amusement with a prickle of genuine concern. She looked at him, then back at the apartment across the street. A faint, high-pitched wail echoing in the otherwise still air. It was barely a sound, almost a trick of her imagination. Yet Leo's entire being was vibrating with its resonance. Her logical mind searched for reasons to dismiss it. Perhaps he's just restless tonight. Maybe he heard a siren the way dogs do. Before we can... But the explanation felt hollow in the face of Leo's unprecedented distress. He wasn't simply restless, he was insistent. His large head nudged her hand again, a soft, imploring gesture that spoke volumes. It was as if he was telling her, in the clearest canine language possible, that something was profoundly wrong and she needed to act. A strange intuition, a fleeting echo of maternal concern she hadn't felt in decades, began to stir within her. It was a feeling she couldn't rationalize. A whisper in her soul prompted entirely by Leo's unwavering conviction. She thought of the young couple, The glimpse of the tiny bundle. New parents. Struggling, perhaps, as all new parents do. But the intensity of Leo's reaction suggested something more. Slowly, Mrs. Gable rose from her armchair. Her joints ached a little, as they always did in the evenings. But a new resolve propelled her forward. She walked towards the door, Leo trailing closely behind her, his tail giving a single, hopeful wag. As she grabbed her cardigan, she glanced back at him. His eyes, fixed on her, seemed to hold a silent plea for courage. "All right, old boy," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." The cool night air was a shock against her face as she stepped out of her building and crossed the quiet street. The lights were indeed on in the apartment across the way, a warm glow spilling onto the pavement. Mrs. Gable felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. What would she say? "My dog thinks your baby is crying too much." It sounded utterly ridiculous. Yet, Leo's unwavering conviction had been too powerful to ignore. She reached their door, a modern, anonymous slab of dark wood, and hesitated. Her hand hovered. Then, with a deep breath, she raised it and gave a tentative knock. It was a soft sound, almost hesitant, but in the silence of the street, it echoed with unexpected loudness. Leo, who had remained on her porch, watching her every move, sat down, his gaze fixed on the door, an unspoken anticipation in his posture. A moment passed, then another. Just as Mrs. Gable was about to turn away, assuming no one was home, or perhaps they were asleep, she heard a faint shuffling sound from within. The lock clicked, and the door opened a crack. A young woman, her face pale and drawn, her hair disheveled, peered out. It was Sarah. Her eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted, widened slightly in surprise at the sight of Mrs. Gable. She held a tiny, swaddled baby against her shoulder, and even from the hallway, Mrs. Gable could hear the faint, lingering whimper of the infant. "Oh," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "Hello." She looked confused, clearly not expecting a visitor, especially an older neighbor she barely knew. Mrs. Gable felt a sudden rush of awkwardness. The carefully constructed pretense she had rehearsed in her mind felt flimsy, almost transparent. "Good evening," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I'm Eleanor Gable from across the street. I saw your lights on, and I thought I'd pop over to welcome you to the neighborhood properly. I know you've been here a few weeks, but it's been so busy." The lie felt clumsy, but Sarah, too weary to question it, simply nodded faintly. "Oh, thank you," Sarah managed, a small, tired smile gracing her lips. "That's very kind." She shifted Lily in her arms, trying to settle the baby, who let out another soft cry. Mrs. Gable's gaze dropped to the infant, then back to Sarah's face, registering the profound exhaustion etched there. The faint whimper of the baby was louder now, confirming Leo's silent alarm. The awkwardness dissipated, replaced by a surge of genuine concern. Leo's instincts, she realized, had been entirely correct. There was indeed distress here, a quiet suffering that needed to be acknowledged. Sarah's surprise at Mrs. Gable's unexpected visit quickly melted away, replaced by a deep-seated weariness that made any pretense impossible. She was too exhausted, too overwhelmed to maintain the polite facade of a composed new mother. Her apartment, usually kept meticulously tidy, betrayed the chaos within a forgotten burp cloth draped over a chair, a half-empty baby bottle on the coffee table, and the faint yet persistent scent of baby formula and sleep-deprived anxiety. "Please, come in," Sarah said, stepping back and gesturing vaguely into the dimly lit living room. She felt a flicker of embarrassment, but it was swiftly extinguished by the sheer weight of her exhaustion. Mrs. White Gable entered, her gaze sweeping over the scene with an almost clinical assessment before settling on Sarah's drawn face and the tiny, squirming bundle in her arms. "Oh dear," Mrs. Gable murmured, her voice softening with genuine empathy. She could see it all: the shadowed eyes, the slumped shoulders, the faint tremor in Sarah's hands as she tried to soothe the restless baby. The faint whimpers from Lily had intensified now, a soft, pathetic plea that tugged at Mrs. Gable's heart. She's a bit colicky," Sarah explained, her voice barely a whisper, as if admitting a personal failing. "It's been a long few weeks." Mrs. Gable nodded, her eyes warm. "I remember those days," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "My son, Thomas. He was a terrible colicky baby. We barely slept for the first 4 months." Her words were a lifeline, a shared experience that immediately forged a fragile connection. Sarah looked up, a glimmer of surprised relief in her eyes. Someone understood. Then, Mrs. Gable paused, her gaze drifting towards the window, where the colorful, cheerful images of a children's cartoon were playing on their television screen. It was a familiar scene, one Leo watched daily. A sudden, almost impulsive thought struck her. It was outlandish, perhaps even absurd. But Leo's distress, his insistent nudges, had been so profound. She decided to risk it. "You know," Mrs. Gable began, a slight hesitation in her voice. "My German shepherd, Leo, he's quite taken with your apartment." Sarah looked at her, bemused, a faint, tired frown creasing her brow. "He spends hours at our window, just watching this one, especially when your television is on. He seems particularly fond of, well, the cartoons." Sarah let out a small, tired laugh, a sound devoid of humor. "Really, that's sweet. I usually put them on for Lily, hoping the colors and sounds might distract her. Even for a moment, though mostly they just seemed to make her cry even louder." She gestured to the TV, where a brightly colored elephant was clumsily dancing on screen. "Yes, the cartoons." Mrs. Gable continued, her voice gaining a surprising conviction. "He's been watching them every day, and I've noticed when the baby cries, he gets quite agitated. He tries to tell me something, nudges me towards the window." She paused, searching Sarah's face for a reaction. "It's as if he hears her. He seems to know when she's distressed." Sarah's tired eyes widened, a flicker of something beyond mere fatigue passing through them. He hears her," she repeated slowly, the words almost a question. She looked from Mrs. Gable to the window, then back. The thought was so bizarre, so utterly unexpected. Yet there was something in the older woman's earnestness and the profound exhaustion within herself that made her consider it. "He does," Mrs. Gable affirmed, her voice gentle. "He gets very restless, paces. He's a sensitive soul. I think he watches the cartoons because he knows they're meant for a child. And when he hears the crying, it affects him deeply. He senses your little one's struggle, a wave of emotion, raw and overwhelming, washed over Sarah. It wasn't pity. Not exactly. It was something far more profound. The thought that an animal, a dog she had never even met, could be so attuned to her baby's suffering, could care enough to prompt an old woman to cross the street and knock on her door. It was almost too much to bear. Tears, hot and heavy, welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a sudden, overwhelming gratitude. For weeks, she had felt utterly alone, isolated in her despair. And now a stranger, prompted by her dog, was standing in her living room, offering not just sympathy, but a shared understanding that felt like a lifeline. She looked down at Lily, who, momentarily hushed by the new presence, let out a soft sigh against her shoulder. He he really hears her, Sarah whispered again, the words catching in her throat. The simple, profound act of empathetic listening, not from a human, but from an animal, had pierced through her carefully constructed wall of stoicism. An unexpected, unspoken bond had been forged, not just between the two women, but between a struggling mother and a silent, empathetic guardian. The profound truth of Leo's extraordinary empathy was beginning to unfold. The air in Sarah's living room crackled with a new, fragile understanding. Sarah, her face still streaked with tears, looked at Mrs. Gable, then at Lily, then back at the older woman, as if trying to reconcile the extraordinary revelation she had just heard. The idea that a dog, a silent observer from across the street, could possess such profound empathy, such an acute awareness of her baby's suffering, was both unbelievable and deeply, profoundly comforting. He truly hears her, Sarah repeated, her voice barely a whisper, a mix of awe and disbelief in her tone. Mrs. Gable nodded, her gaze warm and steady. He does, dear. I've always known Leo was special, more intelligent than your average dog. But this is beyond anything I've ever witnessed. His distress tonight, his insistence that I come over. It wasn't for nothing. He was telling me you needed help. He was telling me about Lily. A fresh wave of tears streamed down Sarah's face. But these were different. They were tears of relief, of a profound sense of being seen and understood after weeks of crushing isolation. I just can't believe it, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. For so long, I've felt so alone, so helpless, and all this time. A dog. He was listening. She gently stroked Lily's head, the baby now quiet, perhaps sensing the shift in her mother's demeanor, as Mrs. Gable prepared to leave. A final, poignant detail solidified the incredible truth. She turned to the window once more, her eyes drawn to her own apartment across the way. And there he was, Leo, a dark, majestic silhouette, still at his post, watching them intently. His head was tilted slightly, his ears pricked forward, as if straining to catch their final exchange. To ensure his mission had been successful, he knows, Mrs. Gable murmured. A sudden, profound realization washing over her, cementing every fragmented piece of the puzzle. He knows, he hears Lily's cries. He watches the cartoons because he's learned they are for her, that they accompany her, and he senses when she is in pain. He's been trying to tell me for weeks. He's been her silent guardian. Sarah followed her gaze, and her breath hitched. Seeing Leo there, watching them, so still and focused, confirmed everything. It wasn't just a coincidence, not a quirky habit. It was a deep, empathetic connection that defied explanation. The image of the powerful German shepherd, silently keeping vigil, absorbing the sorrow of a child he had never met, was utterly breathtaking. It was a moment of epiphany, a revelation that pierced through the fog of her despair. He watches the cartoons, Sarah repeated slowly, the words gaining a new weight, a new meaning. He's been watching them for her. The simple, innocent act of putting on a cartoon for her crying baby had been interpreted, understood, and amplified by an animal's profound capacity for compassion. It was a truth so pure, so unexpected, that it left her speechless and profoundly moved. In that moment, the silent chasm between the two apartments seemed to shrink. The isolation Sarah had felt for weeks began to recede, replaced by a glimmer of hope, a sense of belonging. This wasn't just about a dog watching cartoons, it was about a lifeline. Unexpectedly thrown by a furry, four-legged observer. Leo had not only detected Lily's distress, but he had also detected Sarah's. Responding to an unspoken plea that no human had yet been able to fully address, the discovery was more than just a sweet story. It was a testament to the extraordinary, often overlooked, intelligence and empathy of animals. It highlighted the power of unconditional compassion, a connection that transcended species and conventional forms of communication. Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just towards Mrs. Gable for crossing the street, but towards the magnificent creature who had, in his own silent way, extended a paw of comfort and understanding as Mrs. Gable finally stepped out, leaving Sarah alone with a now quiet Lily. A new warmth settled in the apartment. The pervasive sense of despair had not vanished entirely, but it had been fractured, allowing a sliver of light to enter. The knowledge that Leo was watching, that he cared, was a strange, powerful balm. Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that her world and Lily's had just changed, all because of a German shepherd watching cartoons from a window, and the incredible secret he had helped to reveal. The revelation about Leo's silent vigil had a profound, almost immediate effect on both Sarah and Mrs. Gable. For Sarah, the crushing weight of isolation began to lift, knowing that someone, even a four-legged friend, had been silently witnessing her struggle. And, more importantly, caring was a powerful antidote to her despair. For Mrs. Gable, the experience had awakened a dormant sense of purpose, a renewed connection to the world beyond her quiet apartment. Leo, in his silent wisdom, had nudged her into a role she hadn't known she needed. The following day, Mrs. Gable found herself baking. The comforting scent of cinnamon and warm apples filled her kitchen, a stark contrast to the antiseptic smell of her usual routine. She prepared a large, hearty apple crumble, something warm and nourishing that Sarah might appreciate, something easy to eat with one hand while holding a baby. This wasn't just a friendly gesture, it was an act of genuine compassion. Inspired directly by Leo's unwavering empathy, later that afternoon, with Leo watching intently from his window, Mrs. Gable crossed the street again, a warm dish clutched in her hands. Sarah opened the door, her eyes still tired but holding a new, softer light. "Mrs. Gable." "You didn't have to," she exclaimed, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. "Nonsense, dear," Mrs. Gable said, pushing the dish gently into Sarah's hands. A young mother needs her strength, and besides, Leo insisted. She winked, and Sarah laughed. A light, almost joyful sound. This was the beginning of a quiet, yet incredibly significant, period of support. Mrs. Gable began offering small, unobtrusive acts of kindness. She didn't pry, didn't offer unsolicited advice, but simply offered what she had: her time, her wisdom, and her quiet presence. Sometimes, she'd bring over a homemade casserole or a batch of freshly baked cookies, always attributing it to Leo's suggestion. Sarah would find herself looking forward to these visits, not just for the food, but for the brief respite, the shared understanding. One particularly difficult afternoon, when Lily's cries had been relentless for hours. Mrs. Gable arrived. She found Sarah on the verge of tears, pacing the living room with a screaming baby without a word. Mrs. Gable gently took Lily from Sarah's arms. "Why don't you go make yourself a cup of tea, dear?" she suggested, her voice calm and soothing. "I'll just sit with her for a moment." Sarah, utterly spent, didn't argue. She collapsed onto the sofa, watching as Mrs. Gable, with surprising ease, began to rock Lily, murmuring soft, comforting words. Even if Lily didn't quiet completely, the mere act of someone else taking the burden, even for a few minutes, was a lifeline. All the while, the cartoon watching continued. It became a silent, shared secret between the two apartments. Sarah would often find herself glancing up from Lily, her gaze drawn to Mrs. Gable's window. And there, almost always, was Leo, a steadfast presence. He would be fixed on their television, his head tilted, his expression one of profound attentiveness. She started to realize that even if Lily didn't respond to the cartoons themselves, Leo's constant vigil, his unwavering focus, somehow brought a strange sense of solace to her. It was a comforting thought someone was watching over them, a gentle, unseen guardian. She began to feel a connection with Leo herself, waving subtly at his silhouette sometimes, imagining him watching, understanding. It felt foolish, perhaps, but in her desperate state, it brought an unexpected sense of comfort. The silent communication across the street became a unique form of support, a non-verbal affirmation that she wasn't alone. The visual of the gentle giant, focused intently on the screen as if absorbing every frame, began to replace the crushing despair in Sarah's mind with a quiet sense of hope. Leo wasn't just a dog, he was a symbol of empathy, a living testament to the fact that connection and kindness could emerge from the most unexpected places. This extraordinary bond, nurtured by the simple act of watching cartoons, was slowly but surely weaving a tapestry of shared comfort, preparing for the moment when Leo's unique influence would bring an even greater change. The quiet, almost invisible interventions of Mrs. Gable, prompted by Leo's unwavering vigil, slowly began to chip away at Sarah's profound exhaustion and isolation. But it was Leo himself, the silent guardian, who orchestrated the most remarkable shift, the daily ritual of the cartoons. Once a mere distraction, evolved into something far more potent, a direct conduit of comfort between the compassionate canine and the colicky infant. One afternoon, a particularly vicious bout of colic struck Lily. Her cries escalated from sharp screams to a desperate, breathless wail that seemed to drain all the oxygen from the apartment. Sarah, rocking, pacing, singing, felt the familiar panic rise in her throat. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any solution, any shred of hope. Her gaze, almost instinctively, landed on the large window, and then across the street, on Mrs. Gable's window. There, as always, was Leo. He was at his post, his magnificent head resting on the sill, his amber eyes fixed on their apartment. The television in their living room was playing a bright, chaotic children's cartoon, a frantic chase scene filled with cheerful music. Sarah watched Leo. Desperate, he was so still, so focused, so calm. A strange, impulsive thought, born of pure desperation, bloomed in her mind. What if there was something in Leo's presence, his unwavering tranquility, that could soothe Lily? It was a wild, illogical idea, but Sarah was beyond logic. She simply needed a moment of peace, with a deep, shaky breath. Sarah walked towards the window, cradling Lily closer. The baby was still screaming, her tiny body rigid with discomfort. Gently, carefully, Sarah turned Lily so that the baby's face was angled towards the window, allowing her a clear view of the apartment across the street. And more specifically, of Leo. At first, nothing happened. Lily continued to wail, her cries echoing off the glass. Sarah felt a fresh wave of despair. Of course not. This is ridiculous. A dog can't magically soothe a baby. But she didn't move away. She stood there, holding her daughter, both of them facing the window, their eyes, or at least Sarah's, fixed on the distant. Silent guardian. Then, slowly, subtly, something shifted. Lily's cries, though still present, began to lessen in intensity. They became less frantic, more like whimpers, then soft, breathy sighs. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. She watched Lily's tiny face, which had been screwed up in anguish, slowly, miraculously, begin to relax. Her eyelids fluttered, and her little mouth, which had been open in a perpetual scream, now softly puckered, and across the street. Leo remained perfectly still, his gaze unblinking. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, yet his very presence, his focused, gentle energy, seemed to radiate a profound sense of calm that somehow, impossibly, traversed the distance between them. Sarah held her breath, hardly daring to believe it. Lily let out a final, soft sigh. And then, her body went completely limp against Sarah's chest. She had fallen asleep, not just a brief doze, but a deep, peaceful slumber. Her small chest rising and falling rhythmically, Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of emotion. Tears, this time of profound relief and gratitude, streamed down her face. She looked at Lily's peaceful face, then back at Leo, who remained at his post, a silent, majestic figure. The simple act of placing Lily near the window, allowing her to see the gentle giant watching the cartoons, had done what hours of rocking, singing, and desperate attempts had failed to do. The visual of the gentle giant, focused on the screen, radiating a quiet, unwavering energy, seemed to have an almost magical, calming effect on the baby. This wasn't a one-off miracle. Sarah, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, began to incorporate this into their daily routine whenever Lily's colic flared up, whenever her cries became inconsolable. Sarah would take her to the window, and almost invariably, the sight of Leo at his post, silently observing, would bring a measure of peace to the distraught infant. The gentle giant, the cartoon watcher, had become a direct source of comfort, a silent anchor in Lily's stormy world. This chapter marked a significant turning point for the young family. The relentless pressure began to ease. Sarah, seeing tangible relief for her daughter, found renewed strength and hope. The constant dread began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. The bond, forged in silence and empathy across 2 city apartments, had moved beyond observation and into active, life-changing intervention. Leo, the silent guardian, had found his profound purpose, and in doing so, had begun to heal a broken family. Months turned into a year, and then another. Lily, once a tiny, wailing bundle of colicky misery, blossomed into a vibrant, curious toddler. The apartment, once filled with the echoing sounds of distress, now resonated with the joyful babble of a happy child, punctuated by the occasional delighted squeal. And at the heart of this transformation, a silent, unwavering presence remained. Leo, the bond between Lily and Leo, forged in the quiet desperation of colic and the gentle empathy of a German shepherd, had deepened into something extraordinary, an almost telepathic connection that defied the boundaries of species and distance. Lily, even before she could properly walk, would crawl to the window, her chubby fingers pressing against the glass. Her eyes fixed on Mrs. Gable's apartment, she seemed to know, instinctively, that her silent guardian would be there, and he always was. Leo, now a familiar and beloved fixture at Mrs. Gable's window, would greet Lily's appearance with a soft, happy whine that only Mrs. Gable truly understood. His tail would begin a slow, rhythmic thump against the sill, a gentle drumbeat of affection. When Lily babbled, he would cock his head, as if deciphering her infant language. When she giggled, a tremor of contentment would pass through his powerful frame. He was her first best friend, a constant, comforting presence in her young life. Sarah and Mark, witnessing this incredible connection, were constantly amazed. They often found Lily at the window, not just looking out, but seemingly interacting with Leo. She would point at him, babble his name or her version of it, and clap her tiny hands. One memorable afternoon, when Lily was learning to wave, she instinctively waved at Leo, and Leo, in response, lifted a paw and gently, almost imperceptibly, swiped it back and forth against the glass of his own window, a clear, unmistakable acknowledgement of her gesture. Sarah, watching from behind, felt a profound lump in her throat. It was a language only they understood, a silent conversation between a child and her extraordinary dog. Leo's devotion was absolute. He would spend hours at his post. Even when Lily wasn't actively at her window, he seemed to know her schedule, anticipating her presence, ensuring his silent vigil never faltered. He was her unspoken protector, her furry confidant. When Lily had a bad dream, her soft whimpers sometimes carrying across the quiet morning air, Leo would become agitated, pacing Mrs. Gable's apartment until she acknowledged his concern. When Lily laughed, a joyful burst of sound, Leo would relax, often letting out a contented sigh. He was intertwined with her life, her moods mirroring his own. Mrs. Gable, once a solitary figure, now found her days filled with purpose and a renewed sense of community. Her bond with Sarah and Mark had grown strong, built on shared moments of wonder and gratitude for Leo. She would often visit, bringing Lily small, safe toys, or simply to share stories of Leo's latest observations. She realized that Leo had not only brought comfort to a distressed baby, but had also brought connection and warmth back into her own life. He had been a catalyst, a silent matchmaker, bridging the gap between two lonely souls in a struggling young family. The story of the German shepherd who watched cartoons to soothe a baby became a whispered legend in their small community. A heartwarming tale shared among neighbors, though most didn't know the full depth of Leo's emotional connection. They saw the profound impact he had on Lily and her parents. He was a testament to the fact that heroism came in many forms, often in the quietest and most unexpected of packages. This chapter celebrated the unconventional yet powerful connection between a child and an animal. It showcased Leo's unwavering loyalty and protective nature, not just as a pet, but as a sentient being capable of profound empathy and dedicated guardianship. He was more than just a dog. He was a silent anchor, a source of profound comfort, and a living testament to the extraordinary bonds that can form when compassion transcends all perceived barriers. The unbreakable bond between Lily and Leo was a beacon of hope, a reminder that the purest forms of love often arrive on four paws. Wrapped in silent devotion, the extraordinary story of Leo and Lily, once a whispered secret between Mrs. Gable and Sarah, began to ripple outwards. It started innocently enough. A casual mention by Mrs. Gable to a friend during a bridge game, a heartfelt recounting by Sarah to a sympathetic neighbor at the local park. Each retelling, imbued with the raw emotion of the struggle and the profound solace found, carried the quiet power of their unique bond. People were captivated, in a world often consumed by cynicism and strife. The tale of a German shepherd watching cartoons to soothe a colicky baby struck a deep, resonant chord. It wasn't long before a local news reporter, catching wind of the heartwarming anecdote, contacted Mrs. Gable, skeptical but intrigued. The reporter, a young woman named Clara with an uncanny knack for uncovering human interest stories, arrived at Mrs. Gable's apartment. She expected a charming, albeit embellished, tale of an old lady and her clever dog. What she found, however, was something far more profound. Mrs. Gable, with Leo lying calmly at her feet, recounted the sleepless nights, Sarah's despair, and Leo's insistent nudges towards the window. She described the dog's unusual agitation when Lily cried, his unwavering focus on the cartoons, and the stunning moment of revelation when she understood his profound empathy. Then, Sarah, looking healthier and happier than Clara could have imagined, joined them, holding a bright-eyed Lily on her hip. She spoke of her utter isolation, the dark days of colic, and the miracle of discovering Leo's silent vigil. She tearfully recounted how the sight of Leo at the window had become Lily's calming anchor, the very thing that finally brought her peace. Clara, initially composed and professional, found herself deeply moved. Her skepticism melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of wonder. She watched as Lily, now old enough to point, excitedly jabbed a tiny finger towards Leo. "Leo, woof woof," she babbled, her face lighting up with pure adoration. And Leo, in response, let out a soft, deep rumble, his tail thumping a happy rhythm against the floor. The connection was palpable, undeniable. The news segment aired a few nights later. It wasn't just a story about a cute animal. It was a powerful narrative about empathy, resilience, and the unexpected places where comfort can be found. The footage of Leo calmly watching the television, intercut with Sarah's emotional testimony and Lily's joyous babbles, touched millions. The internet exploded. Social media feeds were flooded with the video, shared countless times. Accompanied by heartfelt comments and emojis, the story of the German shepherd who watched cartoons to soothe a baby went viral, touching hearts everywhere. It was a stark reminder that true kindness and compassion often manifest in the simplest, most unassuming ways. People from all walks of life were moved by Leo's selfless act of guardianship, by Mrs. Gable's intuitive response, and by Sarah's journey from despair to hope. This widespread recognition brought an unexpected wave of joy and a sense of purpose to Mrs. Gable. She received letters and emails from people around the globe, sharing their own stories of animal companions and unexpected kindness. For Leo, the fame was largely irrelevant, but the increased affection and admiration from Mrs. Gable and the steady stream of happy visits from Lily filled his days with quiet contentment. His unique intelligence, once only acknowledged by his owner, was now validated on a global scale. The community, initially unaware of the profound drama unfolding across two windows, now embraced them. Neighbors brought over small gifts for Lily, offered help to Sarah, and would often stop by Mrs. Gable's window just to wave at Leo, their faces soft with admiration. The unexpected heroism of a dog had woven a new tapestry of warmth and support through their neighborhood. This was a different kind of justice. Not the punishment of a villain, but the profound reward of good deeds recognized. The story resonated because it spoke to the fundamental human longing for connection, for kindness, and for the simple, unadulterated purity of love. It proved that compassion could be found in the most unexpected places, healing not just a struggling family, but touching the hearts of countless others, fostering a greater sense of shared humanity. Leo, the quiet hero, had not only soothed a baby but had, in his own magnificent way, brought a wave of unadulterated goodness into the world. Years unfurled like a vibrant tapestry, weaving new threads of joy and quiet contentment into the lives of Sarah, Mark, Lily, Mrs. Gable, and, of course, Leo? The apartment that once echoed with the piercing cries of colic was now filled with the sweet cacophony of childhood. Lily's laughter, the patter of her small feet, and the gentle rumble of an old, wise dog. Lily was no longer the fragile infant who found solace in a distant, silent observer. She was a thriving, bright-eyed girl, her spirit as sunny as her disposition. Her bond with Leo remained the bedrock of her early years, a silent, powerful connection that deepened with every passing day. She understood, in a way no one else truly could, the profound significance of the German shepherd at the window when she learned to speak. Leo was one of her first words, A soft Leo uttered with absolute affection. Sarah and Mark, once teetering on the brink of despair, had found their footing, not just as parents, but as a stronger, more resilient couple. The ordeal of Lily's colic and the miraculous intervention of Leo had transformed them. They had learned the invaluable lesson of humility, of reaching out for help, and of finding solace in the most unexpected of places. Their gratitude for Mrs. Gable, and more profoundly for Leo, was boundless. They often brought Lily over to Mrs. Gable's apartment, allowing her to spend time with her first and dearest friend. Lily would bury her face in Leo's soft fur, whispering secrets into his ear, and he would respond with soft licks and gentle nudges, a testament to their unbreakable bond. Mrs. Gable, invigorated by her new role in their lives, found renewed purpose. She had become a cherished grandmother figure to Lily, her days no longer solitary but rich with shared moments and laughter. She often reflected on how Leo, her quiet companion, had been the catalyst for so much good. He hadn't just saved Lily, he had brought a struggling family back from the brink and reconnected Mrs. Gable to the vibrant pulse of human connection. The justice in this story wasn't a dramatic courtroom scene or the downfall of a villain, but the profound triumph of empathy, connection, and the quiet heroism of an animal. It was the justice of a life restored, of happiness found where only sorrow had resided. As Lily grew older, the family celebrated the milestones of her life. And Leo, even in his twilight years, was always an honored guest. Birthday parties saw him lying peacefully amidst the chaos of children, occasionally accepting a gentle pat or a dropped crumb. Christmas mornings would find Lily dragging her new toys to his side, eager to share her treasures with her beloved Leo. The final scene of their story, years after the initial crisis, depicts Lily, now a bright, articulate young girl, sitting on the floor beside an elderly, contented Leo. His fur was nearly white, his movements slow, but his eyes, fixed on Lily's smiling face, still held the same profound love and intelligence. Lily, with a gentle hand, stroked his head, whispering, "You saved me, didn't you, Leo?" Leo responded with a soft, breathy sigh, leaning into her touch, a silent testament to his profound love and the unexpected ways true guardians appear in our lives. Their bond was a living legend, a quiet legacy of kindness, loyalty, and the extraordinary power of unconditional love. It was a happy ending, not born of dramatic rescue, but of a quiet, persistent, and deeply loving vigil that healed a family and touched countless hearts.